97% of women were sexually assaulted in some way, and that includes catcalling. But still, right, there's this feeling of your safety and your security being undermined. So tell me sort of the psychology or the energy levels of what is it like to actually experience something like that, and what do they really have to go through?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting you brought up that study, because I think that as a culture, really as a world, is what we're starting to grapple with, right? Is the way certain people feel safe and others don't. And what is it like to walk around with different experiences, right? So I have a 15-year-old daughter, and the other day she was going out running on a very busy trail. She usually wears a t-shirt. She was really hot. She comes in and she's like, do you think I can go out in my shorts and my sports bra? Because sometimes men will catcall me when I'm running, and I'm afraid there's going to be more of that if I just wear my sports bra and not my t-shirt. And I just felt like, geez, this is where we're at. She can't go jogging on a public trail. You know what I mean? And the reason she was asking is because it was 95 degrees out, right? So she didn't want to have to wear that extra layer. So that's where we're at, and I think there's a lot of different versions of that. People get ostracized for other things as well. It's not just about gender. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so much about helping people feel safe. And I think in their body in the moment, and being able to separate, out from the response that is as if I'm never safe because of that past assault, and the actual, am I in this moment, am I safe, right? Because what happens with trauma of any type, and it could be a car accident, it could be a war veteran, is that they're walking around in the world not feeling safe no matter what, right? Yeah. And there can be unconscious triggers in their environment that heighten it, that are related to what happened that they're not even aware of. And so they're just always in this hypervigilant state of what is going to happen, right?
Yeah, and that's like from a psychological, neurological perspective, like it's a scary thing. Like, yeah, you say hypervigilant, like you're walking around super stressed out, always, setting up all these barriers and boundaries between the people around you just because you feel so afraid of the potentials that could happen to you. And they've shown, sexual assault, the thing about sexual assault is that you can't really get good data on it, but for PTSD, you could get incredible data on it. And for people who have PTSD, which obviously is very similar, you have a lot of post-traumatic stress from being sexually assaulted, their amygdala, which is the thing that controls fear, grows in size like crazy. And their hippocampus, which is the thing that controls learning, memory, and really like growth, shrinks to about 1/3 the size. And this is postpartum, post-death. Yeah. And it's like, wow, like that is huge.
Yeah. And that's based on assault. And then obviously I work with a lot of abuse survivors too. And we see the same thing, that as a child grows up in a home in which they didn't feel safe, and that could be sexual abuse, but it could be other things, being in a home with an alcoholic, other types of physical abuse, emotional abuse, right? Any environment in which you aren't safe, that same sort of brain development skews that way. And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because the brain, as it builds those neural pathways, it just gets stronger and stronger. So how do you actually break that and start to reverse it? The body, the individual has to have experiences of sitting in, feeling relaxed, right? So that's what you're trying to give them through hypnotherapy. I'm trying to do it through meditation, chakra work. Yeah. It has to have safe spaces and moments where the brain and the body experience something else. So those neural pathways aren't the only thing. Those neural pathways of hypervigilance aren't the only thing getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And then you have to be working on the deeper issues of, how this developed, integrating that experience, shifting the vibration, right? So if nothing else, that's what I'm trying to give someone. Can you do 5 minutes a day of sitting there focused on your root chakra and your heart and saying, I am safe, and magnifying those vibrations of those two chakras that are linked to feeling that way? And that'll be the first thing often they'll have someone do, because even just those 5 minutes, the brain is not in that hypervigilant state if they can experience that. Yeah. This modality is not for everybody. And I think that's the reality. Like you said, I attract a certain type of person. Other people are going to respond to other modalities. And sometimes I'll refer people to other modalities. You have to find what works for you. And that's really, really individual.
Okay, so give me the specific templates of the sort of people that come in. And obviously it's really tough to put people into groups like this, but to try to understand the different psychologies of somebody who has been sexually assaulted, like it seems like there's the type of person that is hypervigilant, but then there's also the type of person who kind of just like blocks it off and becomes sexually promiscuous, right? Tell me about all these different type of templates and the people who sort of come in and how they cope with the sexual assault.
Yeah. So sexual promiscuity is more common when someone has been sexually abused as a child or assaulted as a teenager. Essentially what happens, because so much sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse, really occurs with someone you know. So it's an
Yeah.
authority figure that was supposed to be a trusted figure. It's usually a family member, a teacher, a coach. It's, you know, some religious figures, all these stories that have been in the news, right? So what happens is that and there is a lot of psychological manipulation that goes along with that, right? But the message that the child receives, and often the abuse was before they even knew what sex was this is what love is. And this is where your value is. This is where attention is. This is how you get validated. So as they hit teenage years and they do come into their sexual self, this whole relationship to sex is already skewed by this messaging they've received from their abuser. And the promiscuity is sort of a way of playing that out. This is what love means, right? Or this is how I get attention. This is how I get value and worth. And so that needs to be reprogrammed, reframed, right? Understanding sexuality in another way, really creating a sense of self-worth that is not tied to that at all, right?
Yeah.
So the other direction, yeah, go ahead if you want to speak to that first.
No, yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, like to parse out the difference between like the person who's assaulted as a kid and the person who's assaulted in, let's say, college, right? Because I'm in college and I see it all the time. You know, for someone who's sexually assaulted as a kid, it's not your friends who are doing it, right? And therefore, it doesn't lead to as many trust issues, right? If you're at a party and you get sexually assaulted and it's done by somebody who is essentially a stranger that you've been walking around with and could potentially be anywhere, then it leads to these huge trust issues. So I could see the difference. Yeah.
I think trust issues are common either way, because when you're younger, it's a adult that you were supposed to trust, right? So people can be like, it doesn't make sense to me. Why would someone get promiscuous? But they're claiming they were sexually assaulted, or, and we get all into all this victim blaming. Well, it's very complicated. If your self-worth and the culture, frankly, is telling you this is what validates you, right? Sexual attention, then, that's going to be built into your psyche. Then what we have is so many victim blaming and secrecy things. The things with childhood abuse and assault as teenagers, as we know, is many people never share it. They're ashamed of it, or they do tell someone, and all too often tell a family member, and the family member will just be like, okay, don't tell anyone else that.
Yeah.
I'll try to keep you away from Uncle Joe, but don't tell anyone else. So the message still is that somehow there's no ramifications for Uncle Joe. The ramifications are to me, right?
Yeah.
And I have to hold this in. So there's all this secrecy stuff that does create also a lot of lingering issues. Then you have people that go to the other end of the spectrum and really shut down to sexual contact altogether and become very walled off and self-protective. And it's really, and you have people in between, but those are kind of the two extremes of how someone might respond. And in general, as a culture, we tend to understand the response of shutting yourself down, and we don't understand the promiscuity, but they're really the same thing.
That's so interesting. So yeah, explain how they're, well, okay, so you're saying they're the same thing because they have the same root cause?
Yeah. Okay. And it's really an issue of, self-worth and feeling shame, right?
Yeah.
And in one case, it's like that shame causes you to completely shut yourself off. And in the other case, that shame causes you to sort of escape into maybe sexual activity that's not healthy.
Yeah.
Seeking love, right? Thinking that somehow it's going to be different. Someone's actually going to love you. Through that activity, right?
Yeah, like it's completely connected. Everything is connected because, of course, that person was your trusted person. So tell me, how do you go through, right? How do you, for both of the different, let's say, templates, how do you handle each of them?
Yeah. Well, and of course, those are extremes, and we have lots of variation in between, but they represent two energetic types. So this person who's really walled themselves off, they usually have a very strong navel chakra, often very successful. I mean, I've worked with many individuals who were highly successful, for example, in the external world and essentially had no sexual life. And it really was that, they put all their energy into that. So from the external world, they were extremely accomplished, right? No problems. No one would ever guess this in their history, right? So we're really working then with someone who has a really strong navel chakra. That's how they go through life as a survivor, powering through, which is what that energy center represents. So what we're doing energetically is working with letting that go a bit, opening up the other chakras and experiences and vibrations associated with the other chakras, fundamentally trying to feel safe in the body so they can begin to explore sexuality. And then we're working with those trauma memories if needed, depending on what other work someone has done, to again help create that integrative narrative. This happened to me, so I developed these particular patterns to cope, but that's ended up shutting me off in certain ways. I now want to open up in those ways, right? We need to create that narrative.
Yeah, it seems like they were almost denying themselves a little bit, right? So, this is a big problem. It seems like they're attaching themselves to something like the traditional masculine, like energy or archetype or whatever. It seems like they're sort of saying, I'm going to shut down all of my emotions, shut down all of my social goals, and just sort of go for achievement.
Yeah, exactly. And because that feels safe, like that will bring me safety. It's all about if I can just control my whole world, achieve success as our society has defined it, maybe then I'll feel safe. So it's really, but then it becomes a very controlling personality sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And any relationships will be control based. And some of these individuals, by the time they get to me, sometimes it's because they've had issues with anger management. And they come to me for, I need anger. Now that is because it's like if you've developed this over time, this safety is based on feeling everything's in control. As soon as someone does something that threatens your control, you go into fight mode, right? We talk about trauma response, fight, flight, or flee, right? So sometimes when someone comes to me and they want to work on anger, I'm always like, what else might be going on? And sometimes this will be what unpacks. Okay, there's this real control personality that's developed. It's made them very successful, but it's actually rooted in trauma. And they can still be successful without that level of needing control that causes them to go into fight mode all the time.